Hey everyone, this is Santiago Fernandez. I'm here with Chartwells, and happy International Education Week to everybody. Just want to bring you this excellent dish that we're going to prepare for you. It's an Argentinian style churrasco steak with some delicious roasted potatoes and roasted vegetables along with the chimichurri sauce. Alright, so what we're going to be starting with today is getting our portion of flank steak cut up, seasoned, and trimmed and ready to basically cook up here on our saute pan. First thing we want to do is we're going to take our piece and inspect it for what we call silver skin or membrane, and it's going to look like quite likely like a little bit of silver skin, just something that looks tough, something that you might even look at and say, that's not something I want to eat. Well, that's why we're going to take it off there. And not only that, but it's going to ensure that when we cook this particular muscle that it doesn't seize up amongst cooking and get really tough. It'll make sure that it gets nice and tender and juicy and soft for you when you eat it. One thing that I will recommend is when you go to the deli or your local butcher to buy this cut of meat, if you ask them to make sure that they trim and clean that silver skin off for you, they can have it done for you. If not, I'll show you how to do it right here. So what you're going to do is a technique that we call feathering. It's very simple. You basically take any sort of silver skin or membrane that you can see on the steak, and then you're going to come at it with your knife from one angle and make a slight cut just between where that starts and the rest of the meat, red meat, begins. Once you've made that cut, you come in back from the other end and you trim it off and ensure that it's been removed. And that's it. Once you have these beautiful red cuts and just a little bit of the super white solid marbling, which is actually fat, if that stuff's good, you can leave it on there. It's just that silver stuff, really thick, almost, like I said, very skin-like consistency that you want to make sure you trim off. So, this one, thankfully, is a very cleaned up piece and it doesn't have very much on it. All right. There we go. Nice little piece there. See, not very much, which is good. You don't want to have a lot on the side that looks a lot red, because that means that you're just wasting good meat. But you want to make sure that you do trim all that stuff off. And now we're going to cut it down to what we call a portion cut size, or basically the size that you would expect to get on your plate for one serving. Because this piece right here is about 12 to 14 ounces, so it could potentially be very well 2 servings for 2 people. So what we'll do is you can kind of see the steak right here on the side of it, how it's got lines that run through it. That's our grain. And we want to cut against that grain. So we're not going to cut this way, but we're going to cut this way with it. All right. And then we'll set it aside. And now we can prepare our seasoning blend and get that ready so we can season it up. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to prepare an Argentinian style spice blend. And we're basically just going to take a couple different seasonings, mix them together, a little whisk right here that we're going to make sure it ensures everything's incorporated properly. And then we'll season up our beautiful flank steaks here to make sure that they're ready to cook. So we're going to start with some good coarse salt. I like to use a coarse kosher style salt because you will find that most recipes that you find online, when they call for salt, that's what they mean. So if you use something that's like a fine grain iodized or sea salt that's been finely ground, you might find yourself using a little too much. So try out some coarse salt, and we're going to go with about 1 tablespoon here. Granulated garlic, we're also going to use 1 tablespoon. The lemon pepper seasoning, which we're going to use half a tablespoon of. This is smoked paprika. We're going to use a half a tablespoon of that. And onion powder, half a tablespoon. And that's it. We'll just take our whisk and whisk it up. Once it seems like it's all one nice, uniform, even color, spice flakes ready. Alright, now what we're going to do is we can season our steak with it. Alright, so now that we have our seasoning blend prepared, we're going to take it and take our portion cuts of steak here and season them. Now you can use a shaker if you'd like. If you have one at home that's empty, you can fill it with this and then just pour it out of the shaker. However, I do like to use the old technique of just using your fingers. And you're basically, it's almost like playing the world's smallest violin. You're just gonna pull your fingers back and forth, and that's going to just slowly season your stuff nice and evenly. Don't do it from too close to the protein, otherwise it won't spread out evenly. You kind of want it to be able to hit the air, and then it gets this nice even powder, kind of like it's snowing. Don't want to over season it either, but you want to make sure that it's all nice and well coated. Once that's the case, you're going to turn it over, and then make sure that we season the backside as well. Now, as always, as you can see, I use a different hand than what I handle the meat with to make sure I go in my seasoning, because we don't want to cross-contaminate everything, especially if you have some left over. You can always use it for something else or another time that you want to cook. Excellent. Once it's well seasoned, I kind of like to press it into the meat a little bit, almost like if it was a dry rub, to ensure that it's kind of like worked its way in there. So then as it sets, it'll just be fully coated. All right. Once we've done that, take these gloves off, and we can begin to preheat our pan to make sure it's hot and ready for the steak. Okay, so up next, we're going to work on preparing our fingerling potatoes for roasting, as well as our vegetables for roasting. It's going to be a mix of a medley of both of them. It's really simple. Once you get them all cut, oiled up and seasoned, they go on this nice sheet pan and go straight in the oven all together, and then they get roasted at 425 degrees for about 20 to 25 minutes. So I'll take you through how we're going to chop and cut these so that they all cook evenly and come out tasting delicious. So what we have here are some yellow fingerling potatoes, which potatoes are huge as far as Argentina and that whole side of South America. It's something that very culturally important. Back in the days, they had over hundreds of different varieties of potatoes. And they had even gotten to the point where they had, without science or anything like that, their own ingenuity realized that some of these potatoes were actually poisonous if they ate them. However, if they buried them at the top of some mountains with a specific type of red clay, that the minerals in that clay would actually pull those toxins out of the potatoes after 6 months of them being buried. And then they would go back up there, pull them back up, and then eat them. So fun facts about South America and some of the roots to these dishes and why potatoes is such a huge staple in that culture. So we're going to take our fingerlings first. I've already washed them. You always want to make sure you wash potatoes really well. You know, being a root vegetable can have a lot of dirt on it. So make sure they're nice and clean and then dry before you transfer them over here to begin cutting them. We'll take a chef's knife or any sharp knife that you have, and you're just going to take them and cut them in half, long ways. And then you're going to cut them in half, short ways again. And that's it. You basically are going to make 2 cuts into 4 pieces for all your potatoes. And once you have them cut, you can return them to your pan. Now, you can also get creative on this side with different types of potatoes if you happen to find some rainbow fingerlings or, you know, something else that's delicious and baby. And I mean, you can do it. If you don't have access to fingerlings, even yellow Dutches, little baby potatoes always work really well, just because of their size and the fact that they just have a lot more concentrated flavor since they're so small. Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're going to cut our vegetables for our Argentinian vegetable medley. And we have some bell peppers, some red onion, some zucchini, and some squash. And I'm going to show you how to cut these up so that we can have them ready. So for your bell pepper, you're also going to want to try and start standing it up like this. And you're going to kind of use your root here on the top as your guide. You're going to use it to cut off this first side and just kind of get a peek inside here. You're going to see all these white membrane right here, and along with this red flesh and the seeds. So we're going to try and get rid of all the white and the seeds and try and make as little mess as possible. And the best way I found to do that is to, now that we have it opened up, kind of cut as close to the pepper as you can, trying to cut as much of the white stuff off. You will still have a little remaining on there, but it can come off easily. And you just keep rotating your pepper until you've gotten all the sides off, and you take the bottom off, leaving as little of the red as you can as possible, but taking off all the white. Just take a little bit of this off as well. All right. Now we can discard this. The bell pepper, we're not going to dice it, or we're kind of close to a dice. It's about a large dice. So what you'll do is you'll come through and you're going to make some thick slices first. And then you'll turn it, and you'll come through again. So what I like to see is about bite size, a little bit of a larger bite size piece, because it will shrink slightly as it cooks. You do want to keep them about bite size at the edge. So. Alright. Once you've got your bell pepper all cut up, we'll set it aside. Got a little more. You do want to use your whole bell pepper for this. Alright. Now our red onion. We're going to start by taking, so you've got a root with all these little hairy things on there. We're going to start by taking this side that doesn't have that off. Slicing it right at the top. Then you can slice this bottom part off. If you have any of this flaky, dry pepper or onion skin, don't worry about it. We'll get it off here shortly. All right. And now it's going to go straight in half. And now you have the opportunity to be able to peel this layer of that dry, kind of flaky skin, revealing that beautiful, shiny onion under. All right, now we can discard that. Oh, that was very easy. It just hopped right out. Look at that. So you have the center core of your red onion. You usually want to try and remove that and at least trim it up. This part, this one looks like it's done for, so we'll take care of that. If it's really, really big, I usually toss it just because it can be very, very bitter. It can be great to hold for a vegetable stock, however. So now what you're going to do is you're going to take your onions, band them right back up. Usually you want to try and find one side of the onion that's going to be flatter, larger, wider than the other, and it's going to give you more stability as you cut through it. So find that side that seems to be more stable. And then you'll take your chef's knife, your hand, make sure you're using your proper claw technique if you can, and you're going to slice down chunks about that big, little feathers that, again, onions will shrink a lot because they do have a lot of water content as they cook. But once they're done cooking, it'll be a good bite-size portion. All right. So we'll cut that real fast. And take your time, have fun. You don't have to go so fast. It's a nice, easy dish. So, now we'll start with our zucchini. And we can take our squash too at the same time. Both of them are very similar vegetables, and we're going to do the exact same thing to both of them. We're going to take the tops off as close as you can to the top so that we don't waste that much vegetable. And then you do the same thing on the bottom. And the same thing for our little squash here. That stuff we can discard. Now, we'll start with the yellow squash on this one. Go ahead and take it and cut it in half, which will make it easier to work with. You can stand it up and then cut it in half lengthways. And then in half again. You'll do the same thing with both sides. Now you have these two little chunks, look like that, and you'll be able to square them off into little bite-sized pieces. So again, think of a bite-sized piece. This one has quite a bit of moisture, but not nearly as much as the onion, so it won't shrink down as much. They're probably going to end up looking about the same size when you're done cooking them. So think about that when you're cutting the size of your squash and zucchini. So again, I'm just doing the same thing, cutting it in half, and then in half, and then these bite-sized chunks. And we're going to do the same thing with our zucchini. However, the zucchini is quite a bit bigger. So, that being said, at this point in time, this one I usually like to put it on its back and kind of go down the center. And it's going to create, again, that same beautiful shape that we're looking for, consistent, but it's going to be more around the exact same size as the squash so that it all cooks evenly, because these two tend to cook at about the same rate. We'll only use half a zucchini for that. All right, and now we have our vegetable medley all cut up. Okay, so now we get ready to start our vegetables and make sure that they're cooking in the oven and roasting off well. What we'll do is we'll take our sheet pan where we had our fingerling potatoes all cut up on, and we'll take our vegetables, and we can combine the two. Now the key to roasting is not overcrowding, because you want that airflow to get around all the things and to create a nice char on the outside, therefore sealing in a lot of this flavor and moisture and creating a very tender and juicy vegetable inside. So if you need to separate off and work in two pans so that you aren't crowding as much, I highly recommend that, so that you actually have a roasted vegetable at the end of this and not just a baked vegetable. Because when they crowd like that, they'll release more moisture, and then it has this kind of a steaming action inside the pan. That's not the kind of cooking that we're going for right now. Sometimes the way you cook things can affect your flavor quite a bit. So following these instructions to that end will make sure that your vegetables come out just right. So once they're nice and mixed, you want to make sure your potatoes are spread out well and evenly, and your vegetables as well. And that being said, we're ready to season them up. We're going to use some extra virgin olive oil, or you can use a cooking oil of your preference, whether that's avocado oil, grapeseed oil, whatever you might want to use. Just remember, this is being roasted at 425 degrees. So I recommend getting a oil that is tolerable to high heat, or therefore has a high smoke point, is what we call it, or the point at which it burns. Some oils, like regular olive oil, can burn really low temperatures and soak in other oils, so just watch for that. But we have this nice olive oil here, and we're just going to drizzle it lightly on top of all our vegetables and potatoes. And then we'll use our fingers and our gloved hands here to kind of just toss everything and coat it evenly. There we are. Oh, this is going to be so good, you guys. Got some beautiful colors. I mean, you're talking you want a colorful dish that's packed with flavor, great culture. This is a good one to do. One of my favorites. All right, now that we have it all ready and oiled up, we can get to our seasoning. I'm going to just take this glove off and swap it for a dry one. Okay, now that we've got our our potatoes and vegetables all oiled up, we can get ready to season them and get them in the oven. So we'll take our Argentinian spice blend that we made earlier. We have some left over, and we're going to just lightly sprinkle that on top. Good thing about vegetables is vegetables are packed and loaded with flavor. So you definitely want to be careful not to over-season these. They just need a nice light little sprinkling to make sure that those starchy potatoes help soak up a lot of that flavor as well. All right. And then I'm going to hit it with just a little bit of black pepper. I recommend using about a teaspoon for these measurements. Okay, now the stuff is ready to go in the oven and roast at 425 degrees for about 20 to 25 minutes. You're going to look for a little char on the outside, and my best suggestion is check your potatoes. They'll be the ones that take kind of a little longer to cook. And just make sure they're fork tender on the inside. You'll be good to go. Okay, so next what we're going to do is we're going to make our classic chimichurri style sauce. And this is a great sauce condiment that is native to Argentina and Uruguay. It's used very popular there as well. And I highly recommend, I know using your knife or chef's knife and that kind of stuff can be scary, but if you were to put it in a food processor or a blender, what will happen is the olive oil and the red wine vinegar that go inside it will emulsify. In other terms, it will kind of combine together into this very thick substance. And then not only that, but it also kind of purees some of your greens and your garlic. And so a simple sauce like this that doesn't take a lot of technique, we're not cooking it, we're not doing very much to it other than chopping ingredients, putting it in the bowl and mixing them together, relies heavily on things like the size of how you chop and mince things so that they hit your taste buds and your palate at the appropriate times to create that balance of flavor that we want to look for. So chopping these things to the specifications I'm going to give you is crucial to this part, but again, why it's so important to make sure you use your trusty knife. For the chimichurri, we'll go over some of the ingredients real quick. I'm going to use some lime juice, some garlic clove, about 4 garlic cloves will do, fresh oregano, some fresh Italian flat leaf parsley, some olive oil, red wine vinegar, which you could substitute for just extra lime juice maybe, but I wouldn't recommend apple cider vinegar or a rice wine vinegar or anything like that. Red wine's just got that twang that you really want for the specific sauce. We're also going to be using some crushed red pepper and some salt and pepper. That's it. All right. So first we're going to start off by processing our fresh herbs. Always make sure that you wash them thoroughly and then try to dry them on some paper towels to ensure that they're not super wet, because if they're really wet while you're chopping them, it's more likely that you'll get some oxidation as well as some bruising, which means that it'll turn from this beautiful green color into a slightly darker, maybe even black color. So after you've washed and dried them, you're going to take all your herbs and you're going to try and remove these really thick stems because they're very bitter and very potent. And so to get that balance of flavors like we were talking about just right, we really want just the leaves, and maybe sometimes, a few of these small, thinner stems is okay. But try and make sure that you clean up enough parsley to be able to chop up about half a cup. Again, just being diligent to make sure that you go through these and you remove any of these really, really thick stems because they're going to be very bitter. All right, so now that you've got all your flat leaf parsley processed over here, or in other words, taking it all off the big stems and make sure that you got nothing but the nice little leaves and maybe a few of the small thin stems in there, we're going to work on this little bit of oregano that we have here. And for the oregano, you don't really need much. You just need, like I said, I've just got these 3 little sprouts right here, fresh oregano, just because it's so nice and strong. You could substitute it if you don't have access to some fresh oregano for some dried oregano at this point. It's one of those that it won't affect the flavor too terribly much. I recommend if you are going to substitute dry, go for about a 1/4 teaspoon of dry oregano, maybe a 1/2 teaspoon. Always start small and build up because you can't take it out, but you can always add more. And then once you've got the same thing here, you're going to just take these tiny little petals off this oregano and just leave these big stems behind, which will look great in some chicken stock or vegetable stock if you feel up for that. And there we go. All right, so now that we've got our herbs processed and ready to go, we're going to go ahead and chop them up We want them to be a really fine chop. So again, this is something that is very crucial to the sauce to ensure that the flavor is exactly how we want it. So just take your chef's knife, and sometimes you can, what I like to do, especially when it comes to herbs like this, you can put the tip of it down, slightly just lay your hand on this top to help guide it around, and then you just basically bring it down to make this chopping action. Try not to draw your knife back and forth as much, because that movement of sawing through these herbs will again cause bruising and turn it a little bit brown and blackish sometimes. And we want to try and keep that beautiful green color that it has. So by chopping straight down on it, you prevent quite as much bruising from happening with these fresh herbs. And as you can see, I just consistently, as it sometimes it's hard to keep it under your knife, but that's all right. Just keep chopping it what you can. And then what you'll do is you'll just take it on, kind of gather it together in a fine little small pile, and then just run your knife through it again. And you're just going to continue to repeat that until you get some extremely fine chopped parsley and oregano. Okay, so now that we've gotten our our parsley and our oregano chopped up nice and fine how we like it, and this is like I said, what you want is it's just got to be so nice, so fine, so that way it spreads out evenly through that oil and gives you that appropriate flavor that we need. We can put this into a nice mixing bowl. Alright. And then next what we're going to do is we're going to take our cloves of garlic and get those minced up really fine, as well as squeeze out some lemon juice or lime juice out of this lime right here. You always want to make sure that your garlic cloves have been peeled. If you haven't peeled them yet, a great way to do that is to smush them, put them in a container, and shake them vigorously. Once you do that, open up the top, most of the skin should have fallen off. Once you get to that point, all you'll have left is kind of this little root end here at the bottom. You always want to make sure you take that off, otherwise not a lot of good flavor and definitely chewy issue that you don't want to deal with. Alright, we'll just take all those off there. Once we've done that, we can take our cloves of garlic, and if you're not a huge fan of garlic, I recommend just using 2 cloves. I love garlic and everything, and use a lot of it. So for me, I go with 4 cloves personally. But remember, when it comes to things like the garlic, the red pepper flakes, the red wine vinegar, and the salt, I highly recommend starting small. Don't say, oh, I like garlic too, so I'm going to put 6 cloves in there. These are very strong ingredients, so definitely start small. You can always build up and add more, but you can't take it out. So take your garlic cloves, and now we're going to take our chef's knife and slowly press down, trying to make sure that you don't cut yourself here, but you're just pressing them to kind of squeeze them out, which is going to make them easier to mince and chop. There we go. Once they're all kind of crushed like that, you can gather them together a little more easily and begin to dice and chop them up into a very fine mince. You're almost going for a size kind of like the kosher grains of salt that you're going to have that you're using for this recipe as well. Almost that fine, if you can get it that fine. Don't worry, take your time, just keep piling it up, making your little piles as they flatten out, and run your knife through it back and forth. Make sure you get that garlic off that's stuck on your blade back and off so that you don't end up with big chunks, because that'll definitely be that'll affect the flavor of the sauce quite a bit. Same technique I'm using right here that I use to chop those herbs, as we just kind of fold it back into itself and pile it all up, and then run our blade through it again, just straight down. All right, got all our garlic all minced up, really nice and fine. and we can combine it with our fresh herbs in our bowl over here. And now I would say that the labor-intensive part of this is fairly done. Our sauce is almost complete. Just got to add our liquids in there and our seasonings, and our vegetables are roasting nicely in the oven, which should be done here shortly. So now what we will take is our lime, which we'll need some juice from that. Always make sure you wash the outside of it. I like to have a vegetable scrubbing brush personally in my house that I use only for vegetables. Nice, soft to firm bristles. Take warm to cold water to scrub the outside of the skin along like you did with all vegetables. Once you've done that, you're going to take your lime and you're going to roll on it with some pressure. What this is doing is this is going to help bring all the juices to the surface, make it a lot easier to coax that lime juice out of it when you're trying to squeeze it. All right, nice firm couple of rolls here. And you're going to slice it right in half. If you have a lime that's got a lot of seeds, maybe you got a key lime or different types of limes. I got a seedless one, so I don't have to use a strainer. But if you do, just make sure you put a strainer over this when you're squeezing it out to catch all those seeds, because we don't want that in there. You're just going to use half of this lime, and then just by turning it and squeezing it as you go, you can ensure you squeeze all of it out of there. All right. So now what we will do is we will add our olive oil and our red wine vinegar. For olive oil, we're going to use a half a cup. I got a half cup measure here. Oh yeah. And then for our red wine vinegar, we're just going to use about a tablespoon. All right. Now that we've got all that together, we just need to season it up and we'll be good to go. We're going to use some salt. About half a teaspoon of salt, some black pepper, quarter teaspoon of it, some red chili flakes, pepper flakes, 1/8 of a teaspoon of that. Usually it's hard to find 1/8 teaspoon measures. You probably have a 1/4 teaspoon measure, so just fill it up halfway and you're good to go. Now, take our little whisk here. We're just going to whisk it all together lightly. And there you have it, chimichurri. Now's the point where you get to taste it. Grab a spoonful. If it's got too much tart, too much acidity, you're going to add a little more olive oil, some more salt. If it's missing some salt. You like a little heat, you want a little extra heat, a little more kick in there, throw some more red chili pepper flakes in there. Spice it up real well. But other than that, our chimichurri is ready. You can always, I recommend making this ahead because you do want to let it set for about an hour for all those flavors to just kind of infuse into that oil and really be nice and smooth and consistent throughout the whole thing. So yeah, try to make that one ahead if you can. But if not, it's a great fresh thing that doesn't take long to make. Okay. So now we're to the point where we get to cook our delicious flank or churrasco style steak. I've got a saute pan here, all nice and heated up, which you're welcome to cook this steak on a grill. If you have a grill and you love grilling, something that you're comfortable doing, highly recommend it. It'll be great on there. You just want to make sure that you cook it in a fashion where you can get some real high heat to it for a short period of time to make sure that it stays nice and tender and juicy, just because of the type of muscle cut that this is. So, that being said, I have my induction burner and a nice pan here set up. I have preheated this. I do, like I said, highly recommend. Heat is huge with this. Make sure that your steak goes into a hot pan or grill. Don't put it in there and then wait for it to heat up with it together, because then you won't get that nice sear and on the outside to create a beautiful crust with lots of flavors, and then have the ability to lock in all that moisture and juiciness that you're going to want in this delicious steak. So, First off, we're going to check to make sure that our saute pan is good and hot and ready. So that's why I have this lovely little bowl of water. Best way to make sure that you're ready to stay. You hear that noise? It's ready. It's hot. It's preheated well enough to the point that water is just hitting it and instantly vaporizing into steam. That's how hot we want that bad boy. I have this guy set to 380 degrees right now. We're going to just take a little bit of this olive oil, and I'm just going to use it to kind of lightly drizzle it on the steak. And the reason why I do it on the steak and not on the pan for this one is because some of these oils, again, olive oil is a delicate oil, and it can burn up or smoke up at about 325 degrees. So that being set to 380, it would just burn if I put it in there. However, if I take it and rub it onto the meat and apply it there first, it won't burn, because once that meat hits that pan, it's going to cool down considerably. It's right to about the smoke point, which is 325. All right. Once you've done that to your steak, you are ready to throw it in the pan. Just remember, we've already seasoned it. It's got time to let those seasonings kind of bind to the outside, which is going to make for a delicious and excellent crust. So we'll just take this and pour it straight on the pan once it's been nice and well oiled. I love that sound. Now, I know you see probably a lot of Food Network, and you're going to be really tempted to start moving it all around and giving it a shake and this and that. But when it comes to steak, again, what you want is that char and that crust to form to help seal all that flavor and moisture inside, keep all those juices nice. So we're just going to leave it. I know it's hard, but we're going to be patient. We're not going to touch it. We're only going to touch it twice. Once when it's time to flip it halfway through cooking, and then again when we're pulling it off, plate it, or slice it, whichever one you prefer. So we're just going to let it go. I'd say maybe 4 or 5 minutes on each side. Depends on what cooking temperature you like your steak. When it comes to churrasco, I highly recommend it. The most medium, if not medium rare or rare, is really good cut of steak to eat like that. However, you can cook it well done or medium well if you so prefer. It just will get a little tougher and it won't be quite as tender and juicy. Still excellent though. If you are wanting to cook it too well done or mid-rare, quick tip, I don't know if you guys have ever known the hand trick, but that's a great, easy trick to kind of start to gauge. It's not super accurate, but it's a good way to get really close to the steak doneness you'd like. So if you want a steak that's, say, rare, then you're going to basically take this finger, your index finger, pointer finger, and touch it to your thumb. Very lightly. You're not going to apply pressure, you're just touching them together. Then you're going to feel the inside of your thumb right here, and then that pressure is going to be really close to how that texture of the meat will feel when you touch it with your tongs or your fingers to make sure that it is rare. You choose your next finger, your middle finger, it's going to be more like that medium rare feeling right here. This ring finger, it's going to be more like medium. Pinky, medium well, and well done, of course, is cooked all the way through, leaving no pink inside. That being said, if you have the handy dandy thermometer, it's another great way to tell steak doneness and then be more accurate as well. With temperatures starting from rare all the way ranging from 120 degrees to 125, mid-rare 126 to 134, medium 134 to 140, and mid-well 140 to 150, well done 150 to 165. That being said, as you tempt your steak, you always want to tempt dead center, try and get, imagine the probe, where however long your probe is, going inside the piece of meat into the thickest part of it, and then landing right in the middle of it. You don't want to tempt the surface or go all the way through to the point where you're basically touching the bottom of the pan and tempting the pan. So we don't want to know how hot the pan is, we want to know what temperature that steak's at. So by ensuring that the thermometer is placed just right in the center, you can get a good accurate reading. But that's another great way to ensure steak doneness. Oh, another fun tip. Remember that your steak, especially all proteins like that, will continue to cook after you've pulled it off the heat. I would say they're going to rise probably another 4 to 6 degrees even after you pull it off the pan. So if you want to get real close and real, there's somebody who's really picky about how you like it, pull it off just a little bit before you're ready for it, and then it'll finish searing up just like you like it when it's resting. Oh man, that smells good. As it's cooking, you will start to notice around the edges, how that red, bright meat that we had before, as it was raw, is going to start to turn that brownish, grayish kind of color. Once you see that color start to run almost halfway up the steak to the part where you can see it on the backside that we haven't flipped it through yet, that's going to be our first key indicator that it's about ready and halfway through, so that we can flip it over to the other side and finish cooking it on the other side. I'd say we're probably about another minute or two away from that. Okay, I think we're about halfway through there. You'll start to notice even the smell start to change, because what you're starting to smell is what's called the Maillard reaction. The Maillard reaction is kind of like caramelization, but instead of sugars, we're talking about carbohydrates. These carbohydrates get transformed into this beautiful umami and savory flavors that form that nice char and kind of that crust that we were talking about earlier on that steak. So we're going to go ahead and take our tongs, or you can use a slotted spatula. We're just going to grab them, and since he's got a nice sear, you can see it popped right out of the pan, have no problems. Just flip them over on its backside. That looks excellent. We've got that nice char and crust like we were talking about going on it, which is going to ensure that we've sealed those flavors in, and we got this awesome piece of meat done. All right. We're going to let it go again for about another maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and we'll temp it along the way and start to feel it with my tongs, because again, I'm talking about that pressure that I talked about earlier to try and see what that doneness is like. I'm going to aim for about a medium rare. Medium is what I'm going to go for. But you at home, cook with whatever doneness you prefer, and it's still going to be delicious. All right, looks like our steak is just about ready. I'm going to temp him. Got a beautiful medium right here, 140 degrees. Another good tip for cooking a steak, once you see it starts to release the juices at the surface, and you can see a little bit of the red kind of blood juices coming out, that lets you know that you've hit really close to a medium temperature point. We'll turn this off. Now you can see I have some aluminum foil right here, and the reason I have that is we're going to wrap the steak up and allow it to rest for about 10 minutes before we eat or slice it, present it. Because then what that's going to do is it's going to ensure that all those juices that we just worked so hard to seal in there won't just spew out when you cut it. If you just take a meat fresh after being cooked and rip right into it right away, all the juices that you, like I said, worked so hard to keep in there will just fly right out. So fun experiment, if you ever feel like doing that kind of thing, you can take a steak after you've cooked it and test my theory. Cut it and push on it, and then see how much juice comes out. Then let one rest for 10 minutes after you've packaged it up, cut it after 10 minutes, and push on it with another plate and see how much juice comes out of that one. They both have the same amount of juice, it's just one's going to do a lot better holding it in just by giving it that 10 minutes to just sit and rest. So once we do that, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and check on our vegetables, which are ready and out of our oven, and we can go ahead and get ready to plate those and sauce those as our steak rests, and then we'll be ready to plate it. All right, so now we have finished our resting time for our steak. Our delicious roasted vegetables and potatoes are finished roasting in the oven, and our chimichurri sauce is done. So we are at the climax of plating, basically. We've managed to get to the nitty-gritty and have everything ready. So now I recommend always starting with your starch/vegetable first on your plate. Make a real nice appearance, and you can see we have some just beautiful colors on that plate going on there. It just makes for a delicious meal and very appealing to the eyes. You do eat with your eyes first, so you always want to make sure it looks good as well. And then we'll just slightly unwrap this flank steak here. Oh, super juicy and delicious. And you can serve it whole, or you can slice it and serve a slice on there. But I prefer just the whole thing on there. And then boom. Possibly top it with a little vegetable. And then we add our chimichurri, which again, it's like a finishing sauce almost. You could use it as a marinade. Argentinians and Uruguayans don't typically use it that way, but it could absolutely be something you could use in a marinade for fish or shrimp or steak even. And that being said, if you're a vegetarian that you want to not use beef, you can absolutely use a big portobello mushroom cap or one of your favorite veggies and eggplant. Something like that would make a really tasty substitution for that and make this a delicious vegetarian dish. So now we'll just take some of our chimichurri. Always do make sure that you kind of stir it back up again because it will start to kind of settle and separate. But we want that. That means we made it right. And once we've done that, you're just going to kind of lightly drizzle it all of the veggies and all of your beautiful steak here, and it just adds this gorgeous color. And there you have it. Your Argentinian style chimichurri churrasco and vegetables is ready. Enjoy.